Welcome back to the TWTL podcast. I'm Chris Ferris. As many of you have heard, Jesus Messiah has been postponed due to the outbreak of coronavirus in the United States and Louisiana. Pastor Anthony has committed to seeing Jesus Messiah performed, but it will be at a later date. No date has been selected as of yet, but one is selected. I will pass it along here on my channel. In the meantime, we will continue with videos and podcasts of events in the life of Christ, not just during the Passion Week, but also throughout his ministry. We'll also cover other Bible topics. We'll provide these videos with simple animations like the past two videos and with flat backgrounds like in other podcasts. If you wish for us to present our videos and recaps in other formats, let me know in the comments. With that, let's get to the day's video. Gethsemane. Beautiful, serene, secluded. In the shadow of the Mount of Olives, it was the perfect place for Christ's last hours of freedom, to pray with those he called to be his disciples. This was his hour of burden and boldness. Late at night and exhausted, Christ's disciples wanted to rest, but Jesus needed to pray, to deal with his burden. His actions in the temple had caused many to abandon him. People withdrew from him, even though the miracles and teachings kept coming. Every person who dissented made Jesus more vulnerable in the eyes of his followers. It's why some of the disciples had taken to carrying swords, notably Peter. Here in the garden, Jesus didn't have a strategy for how to win the multitude back. He didn't come to plan an overthrow of the Sanhedrin or the Romans. He simply wanted to pray with those who had followed him, trusted him, stuck with him. He took James, John, and Peter with him and began his last hour of freedom. As Christ prayed, something agonizing happened. He began to bleed. He prayed so fiercely, so stressfully, so intensely that blood began to emerge from his pores instead of sweat. Through his prayer, he found the boldness to accept what was the will for his human life, to be sacrificed that saved the world. After praying and accepting his purpose, Christ arose and saw that Judas had led a group of soldiers and priests to arrest him. Jesus chastised them for their cowardice, but the die was cast. Peter, holding one of those swords, swung fiercely but not accurately. One of the guards was struck on the ear. Jesus stopped everything: his arrest, his potential rescue, his betrayal. He stopped all to pick up the severed ear and put it back on the captor's head, healing the man who would assist in bringing Jesus to his death, a last message of mercy to his followers. And like that, Christ was gone, whisked away in the night. His followers left wondering and in shock of what would come next. 3.5 years they had devoted to following him. Now it seemed to be doomed to the end in a bloody and violent massacre. They escaped into the night, and Jesus was marched towards his death. This scene speaks to us today, and it's why it is included in Jesus Messiah. Christ was at his weakest moment in his flesh at this point. He didn't want to take on the great task of self-sacrifice. He pled for it to be removed from him, but the burden was his to bear, his cross to bear. His prayer didn't remove the burden, but it provided him with the courage to fulfill it, to bear it. We all have burdens we must bear. We might think that the burden is difficult, but as it says in Matthew 11:30, Christ guarantees that our burden is light. We might get tired, exhausted, worn out along the way, but so was Jesus. Remember, he was fully man. He felt the same things we feel, yet he took on the burden. He prayed till he bled, and he found the boldness to take on his task. When watching the scene or reading this story in Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22, or John 18, ask yourself, what do I have to do to find the boldness for Christ's burden? How can I let the Word of God speak to me as the voice of God and not just as a book? How can I connect with God in prayer in a way that is meaningful and strengthening? If we will follow Christ's example here, while acknowledging the weakness that is inherent in all of us, that even Christ dealt with, rising above the weakness, we'll find ourselves stepping into the burden that God has for us, the burden that He knows we can carry, the burden that leads to great things and amazing purposes for us, for others, for Christ and His kingdom. I hope this blesses you in your pursuit for the greater burden. God bless, and keep searching.